his manner of unifying leadership that can lead us through this crisis. Get our people safely back to work for all of us to begin to live our lives once again. And that is why I am today announcing my intention to run for the presidency of the Philippines in the upcoming May 2022 elections.
It's a very busy day 6 of the filing of certificates of candidacy for national positions at the Sofitel tent in Pasay. Ferdinand Marcos, former Senator Bongbong Marcos, has filed his COC for president.
Presidential aspirant Bongbong Marcos is not surprised on the petitions filed by civic groups before the Commission on Elections in an attempt to disqualify him from the presidential race. Marcos said he is not afraid and will not withdraw his candidacy. Daniel Manalastas tells us more.
A petition was filed with the COMELEC by civic groups that want the cancellation of the certificate of candidacy for president of former Senator Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. The petitioners claimed that the subject of COC of Marcos contains a false materials representation required under Section 74 of the Omnibus Election Code. They insisted that Marcos has been convicted of violation of the National Internal Revenue Code, or NIRC. That's why he is subject to disqualification. They also claim that Marcos has been convicted of tax evasion. Marcos was unfazed as he responded to the petition.
Kasi siguro, natatakot sila sa numero, i-disqualify na lang ako. Pero hindi ako natatakot, hindi ako atras, hindi ako mag-withdraw, patuloy lahat ng aking gagawin. Hindi ako mag-slide down.
His spokesperson also had this comeback.
Personally, as a lawyer and as an officer of the court, alam ho ninyo, kasuklam-suklam itong ginagawa ng mga taong ito dahil imbis na ang COMELEC ay mag-concentrate sa paghahanda sa ating manalalapit na May 2022 election, binibigyan nila ng kanilang propaganda. 57 pages, 56 were devoted entirely to the old yellow narrative containing the old yellow political attacks. And only one page was devoted talking about the basis for their petition.
Attorney Vic Rodriguez said that the petition will be addressed at the proper time and forum after they receive the official copy. Furthermore, he called it as propaganda and claimed that their camp does not engage in gutter politics. Daniel Manalastas for The Nation.
When we're talking about the material misrepresentation, ang tinutukoy natin yung sinabi doon sa COC that he is eligible for the position of president and that he has not been meted the penalty of perpetual disqualification from public office. Basically, yun ang sinabi ng kandidato. Ngayon, yun yung sina-challenge ng petitioner. Sabi ng petitioner, hindi totoo yan kasi hindi ka eligible kasi disqualified ka. So yun yung representation na sinasabi at yun yung false representation na tinutukoy. But in this case, sabi ng division, walang naging false misrepresentation. Kasi, number one, hindi naman talaga disqualified. And number two, dahil hindi talaga disqualified, tama yung sinabi niya dun sa COC na hindi pa siya nadi-disqualify.
Isang pangkat ng mga numero na tila mas pinapaniwalaan ng ibang tao. Ito po yung Google Trends. Ano naman ito? Ito po ay isang website ng Google na kumokolekta at nag-aanalisa ng mga Google searches ng mga tao para makita kung saan interesado ang mga tao. At ang argumento kasi ng ilan, ang interes ng tao ay isang indikasyon raw na gusto nila ang kanilang ginugugol. Kung titingnan mo kasi ang Google Trends, parang ibang kandidato ang pumapatok. Nauna po si Leni Robredo sa Google Trends na may 55%. Sunod si BBM na merong 25%. Pangatlo si Isko Moreno na may 9%. Manny Pacquiao na may 8%. At Ping Lacson na may 3%. Ang Google Trends po ay kinocompile lamang ang dami ng mga Google searches o yung pang-Google tungkol sa isang paksa o sa isang tao. Kumbaga, base po sa Google Trends noong nakaraang 7 araw, 55% ng nag-Google ng mga kandidato ay tungkol kay Robredo at 25% ang tungkol kay Marcos. Lumalabas na mas mataas ang interes kay Robredo. Pero po ang importanteng tanong, katumbas na ba ito ng pagpabor kay Robredo? Pag ginugol ba kita, ibig bang sabihin na gusto kita? O baka naman mas may gusto lamang akong malaman tungkol sa iyo. Ayon na mismo sa Google FAQs o yung Frequently Asked Questions, hindi raw ito katumbas ng isang survey dahil hindi ka naman tinatanong kung sino ang iyong iboboto. Sa halip, ito lamang daw ay nagpapakita ng interes sa isang topic o sa isang tao. Dagdag pa po ng Google, volume or dami lamang ng search ang pinapakita ng Google Trends. At hindi po yung sentimiento ng mga nag-Google. Hindi raw ito batayan ng pagiging popular o pagkapanalo ng isang tao o ng kandidato.
Let's go! Two joints! Two joints!
Two joints parang mafia.
Real talk lang to my man. Meron kang bars pero broke ka pa rin. Race cars at mga dope na.
presidential aspirants, narito man o laging absent, walang sino man, kundi ako, ang sadya at aktwal na nagsugal ng sariling buhay sa pagligtas sa panganib ng sino man. Kailangan natin ng Pangulo na handang ipaglaban kayong lahat para ipanalo ang sambayanang Pilipino.
May eleksyon o wala, bagyo man, kahit anong sakuna, pandemya, kahit anong problema, nandito po ako. Kahit po anong kwento ang ipakalat sa akin, ang totoo, kumpleto po kami ng resibo. Kaya po wag na nating hanapin ang ayaw namang humarap sa atin. True leaders show up and man up.
Sang-ayon din ako, pare. Kailangan natin kunin yung 203 billion na yun. Sisiguraduhin natin, sisingilin ko yun, kukunin ko yung 200 billion na yun, ibibigay ko sa magsasaka, ibibigay ko sa driver bilang ayuda ng taong bayang nangangailangan ng tulong ngayon. Kung masisingil ko yung 203 billion na estate tax sa isang pamilya at iatras ko ang buwis ng krudo at kuryente at 50%,
Pinasa naming mga tax packages, ang dami nun Ang na-attain lamang, 101 billion pesos. Pero 203 billion nga na sisingilin lamang na andyan na, bakit ay singilin ng biyaya?
Ang ibibigay natin na ayuda ngayon sa napantawid pasada ay 200 pesos na napakakonti nun. At ito 230 billion pesos. Pag nasingil natin ito, hindi na natin kailangan tipirin yung ating mga kababayan. Number 1 na nakikinabang sa disinformation si Mr. Marcos. Number 2, kailangan yung social media platforms should be made accountable dahil sila yung nagiging bahay nitong mga disinformation na ito.
kailangan natin silang habulin at papanagutin bakit sila pumapayag na magkaroon ng mga fake accounts sa kanilang application.
Kailangan po talaga makontrol yung mga fake news na yan, makontrol ng ating gobyerno yung social media.
Dapat ay nabigyan ng katarungan yung lahat ng dapat ay sila ay patungan ng parusa dahil sa kanilang mga ginagawang mali.
Sa palagay ko naman, basta't Pilipino yan, at tapat na makita na yun, na tapat na tayo magdadala ng pagbabago at tunay ang ating pagkakaisa, ay wala namang sigurong Pilipino ang tatanggi na tumulong sa kapwa Pilipino. Kung hindi ko naman sinasabi tungkol sa politika ito Ang sinasabi ko tungkol sa pagtulong sa kapwa Pilipino para pagandahin ang Pilipinas. Sa palagay ko, kahit na hindi kami magkakasundo sa maraming ibang bagay, that will be a unifying factor. Dahil lahat naman siguro gustong tulungan ang sambayanan.
next 2 minutes.
Maraming salamat na sa lahat na nabigyan kami ng pagkakataon upang pag-usapan ang ating mga problema na hinaharap. Sa tagal ng aking pagsiservisyo, ngayon lang po ako nakakita ng ganitong krisis na hinaharap ng ating bansa ngayon. At pagka tinatanong ko sa taong bayan kung ano ang kanilang kauna-unahang pangangailangan, ang laging sagot sa akin ay trabaho, trabaho, trabaho. Kaya't dapat natin magdagdag ng trabaho para mabigyan ng mas magandang buhay ang mga naghihingalo ngayon dahil sa pandemya, dahil sa krisis na dala rin ng pandemya. Sa aking palagay, ang mga sektor na ito ay unang-una yung MSMEs, yung Micro, Small, Medium Scale Enterprises. Dahil 95.5% ng ating negosyo ay nasa kategoryang yan, 62% ng employment ng mga employer ay nasa kategoryang yan. Kaya at bukod pa ron, sa pag-aaral ko, nakita ko na sa bawat gastos ng gobyerno, malakas ang balik ng pag-create ng trabaho, dadami ang trabaho. Pangalawa, agrikultura. Kailangan natin patibayin ang agrikultura natin, pagandahin uli natin ang agricultural sector natin. Dahil napabayaan ito na matagal at nakita nung pagdating ng pandemya kung paano tayo naghirap dahil umaasa na lang tayo sa importasyon. Bukod pa ron ay maraming trabaho ulit ang may bibigay kapag tayo ay nag-invest sa agrikultura. Pangatlo, isa sa pinakamabilis sa aking nakikita na industriya na makapagbigay ng trabaho ay ang industriya ng turismo. Ang industriya ng turismo ay madali kasi ibigawin natin ito para sa ating mga kababayan. At sa ilalim nito ay ang ating infrastruktura, kasama na dyan ang digital infrastructure para pagandahin ang ating internet, palawakin
Senator Marcos, the time is up na po.
Ang ating internet service.
Thank you, Senator Marcos.
Reason why, and this is for all the candidates, I ask this question is that right now I'm sure the big powers are trying to carve their own spheres of influence. And because we've always been within the sphere of influence of the United States of America, the Quad is simply an extension of this proposed collective security arrangement.
Senator Marcos?
Yes, I think any of these agreements we should, of course, encourage as long as it is very clear to us what is the advantage to the Philippines. What the professor just mentioned was she spoke about the great powers trying to carve out spheres of influence. I reject that model that I believe no longer applies in the geopolitics of the modern world. The old Cold War thinking. We have to apply our own way. And so it really would depend on what is inside, or what those agreements say that the Philippines what will be doing and what those other partners of ours will be doing for the Philippines. And once again, because we shouldn't think of the old Cold War system, we should always think in terms of the fine line that the Philippines has to tread in all our foreign policy decisions.
But if Mr. Marcos, if you reject the concept of spheres of influence, does that mean you are going to scuttle the Mutual Defense Treaty when you become President of the Republic?
By no means.
Linked to the United States of America as a defense ally.
No, by no means. The relationship with the United States, our special relationship with the United States is not something that we can treat, be cavalier about. It is a very important one, and it has stood us in good stead for over 100 years. And that, I think, will never disappear from the Philippine psyche, the idea and the memory of what the United States did for us and fought with us in the last war. And so that is a specific part of our foreign policy. But then, as we approach, we know that we are a hot spot right now. The West Philippine Sea is a hot spot in geopolitics right now. And that is why we still have to find our own line in terms of all of these arrangements. Except the one simple principle is that we will not cede 1 square inch of the Philippines to any country.
do I have time for one more follow-up with Mr. Marcos?
Yes, Professor Carlos.
Yeah. Okay. If that is the stance that you have taken, Mr. Marcos, suppose you have a situation where China is trying to, take us in, embrace us within its sphere of influence. How would you react as our chief architect of our foreign policy?
Once again, in terms of specifically to China, the correct approach still seems to be one of engagement. And no matter what the superpowers are trying to do, we have to work in the interest of the Philippines, and we cannot allow ourselves to be part of the foreign policy of any other country, and we have to have our own foreign policy. So again, whatever the superpowers do, we as a highly strategic geographic are having a highly strategic geographical location in the world, really have to walk that very, very fine line between these great powers who I always say these are great powers. We are in between. If they sneeze at the same time, we disappear from the map, and that is something that we always have to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Ngayong gabi sa tanan, issue po ng kahit kaninong administrasyon ang korupsyon, na tinatansyang may epekto sa mahigit kumulang 20% ng budget ng pamahalaan kada taon. Ngayong magkakaroon ng bagong Pangulo, kailangan muling iakyat sa talakayan ang pagnanais na matigil ang pangungurakot, sapagkat ang isang malinis na gobyerno ay nagsisimula sa isang tapat at marangal na Pangulo. Kung kayo po ay magiging Pangulo, una, kusa mo bang ilalabas o hindi sa publiko ang iyong SALN or Statement of Assets, Liabilities and Net Worth? At pangalawa, kusa ka bang magsasagawa ng waiver sa mga provision ng RA 1405 na nagbabawal sa pagpaalam sa publiko ng laman ng inyong mga bank accounts?
Well, sa issue ng pagbigay o ng salin, ay ako, para sa akin, hindi problema yon. At hindi lang ako nagsusulat ng salin for the last 6 years. Pero kung ako'y maging mapalad sa darating na halalan, ay natural, ay kailangan gagawa ng salin, at ito ibibigay ko sa publiko pag hihingiin sa akin. Ngayon, sa aking palagay, yan ang desisyon ko bilang isang individual. Sa aking palagay ay hindi na kailangan palitan ng batas, at nasa sa bawat opisyal na yan kung sila ba ay handa na ilabas ang kanilang salin. Siyempre, dadagdag ko, kung may kaso na may court order na sasabihin ilabas ang salin, ay kailangan talagang ibigay. Pag na-mandate ng isang korte, maliwanag na talagang ibigay at ipalaman. Sa sarili ko lamang, para maging maliwanag, kapag ako ay susulat muli ng salin, ito ay gagawin kong public information. Sa aking palagay, kung sino ang nasa batas na sinasabi kailangan sumulat ng salin, ay kung nasa sa kanya, kung sila ay maglalabas. Ngayon, ang pamilya ko naman ay siguro hindi dahil pamilya ko kailangan magsulat ng salin at kailangan ilabas. Kaya siguro yung aking sinasabi ay lahat na, kung may pamilya man ako na nakaupo na sumusulat ng salin, ay sa palagay ko handa rin sila na ilabas lahat yan.
Professor Carlos started us off with a foreign policy question, and I'd like to ask something similar where it converges with gut issues. The public discourse on the West Philippine Sea often glosses over the interests of the smallest stakeholders. It was refreshing to hear several candidates for president mention the need to allow Filipinos to fish in the disputed areas, but we have not heard specifics. The concern for our fisherfolk seems to be growing on a larger audience, particularly the young voters, as evidenced by the release just days ago of a music video featuring the rock band Sponge Cola and singer Karil. If elected president, how will you look after the interest of small fishermen who are occasionally harassed by foreign vessels and often crowded out in the controversial area by fishing boats from countries with competing territorial claims like Vietnam, Taiwan, and of course, China?
talaga tayong issue, hindi lamang sa conflicting camps sa gitna ng Pilipinas at saka China. Kaya ngayon lang ang nakita kong national election na naging issue ang West Philippine Sea or ang foreign policy. At sa palagay ko, sa dami ng ating kailangan ayusin, sa ating pagsasama, sa pagkaalyansa natin sa China, ay unahin natin ito. Ito ang pinakauna na dapat natin simulaan, na makabalik ang mga mangingisda doon sa kanilang palaisdaan na matagal na ginagamit, na daan-daang taon na. Siguro naman, may papaliwanag natin sa China na ang mga bangka ay hindi naman military threat yan sa kanila. Bakit sila maglalagay ng warship doon? Ngunit kailangan natin mag-responde. Kung maulit yung nangyari noon, tayo magpadala naman tayo ng Navy o kahit na Coast Guard para merong military presence, meron tayong presence of the state na nandun, na nasa lugar na yun. Pangalawa, puntahan natin ang ASEAN at magpatulong tayo sa ASEAN. Dahil ang ASEAN ay meron ding binubuo na code of conduct para sa ASEAN at saka sa China, at sana maipasa na yan. Punta pati tayo sa UN at magpadala tayo ng delegation sa Beijing para kausapin ang Presidente Xi at sasabihin paano ba natin ayusin ito at paano ba natin gagawin para hindi na maulit itong nangyari sa nakaraan.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. Mr. Ang, any follow-up questions?
Yes, the question is what specific policies you will adopt. And Senator Marcos, you mentioned in the interview you had with DZRH and the Manila Times earlier that you wanted to use diplomacy over military solutions. I mean, are you changing that policy now?
No.
And in that same interview, Caliodi was saying that he wanted to make the West Philippine Sea a zone of peace. And now he's talking about possibly escalating the situation in that area. It's undeniably that we have to deal with China. The question is, as president, how will you do it?
No, the reason I spoke about putting a military presence there is so that the government, the Republic of the Philippines, has a presence there to show to China that we are defending what we consider our territorial waters. And that is not for them to go there to fire upon the Chinese vessels, but merely to make their presence felt so that the Chinese know we are aware of what they are doing, we do not agree with what they are doing, and we carry on with our diplomatic back channel, side channel, whatever way we can do to fix the problem and make us have a system so that we no longer have this problem again. Yes, and furthermore, I think, as I said, that this is not something that that we should consider as isolated from the general problem or the general discussions that we are having with the People's Republic. It should be the first part, in my view, because what we are, as Filipinos, we are most concerned at this moment, the immediate concern, na makabalik ang mga mangingisda dun sa kanilang palisdaan. Yun ang unahin natin. Ngayon, pag nakahanap tayo ng kasunduan sa People's Republic of China, ay siguro baka nasimulaan na natin ang pag-uusap tungkol sa West Philippine Sea. Dahil kung nasabi natin, amin yan, at tumanggap sila, umpisa na yan. Diyan tayo magsisimula at dahan-dahanin natin itong problema na meron tayo sa China.
Yes, there is no doubt that what is being fought over here is fish, isda. And so there is also no doubt that the food security of China cannot be at the expense of the food insecurity of the rest of us. Now, let's move away from the pseudo-militaristic perspectives that some of you have noted earlier. And how about thinking about a regional fishing agreement, which is along the lines that Mr. Abella talked about a while back? The reason why I talked about that is, well, there's a personal reason because I'm writing a book on regional fishing agreement. And since any one of you will become the President of the Republic of the Philippines, I was wondering if it is worth writing that book on a regional fishing agreement.
Why not?
Who wants to take on that question and statement first?
If I may,
Senator Marcos.
I beg to differ that this is about fish. It is not about fish, in my view. It is about territorial waters, and that when we have these 200 Chinese boats coming and blocking our fishermen, it is to assert their claim that this is part of their territorial water. And that is why you cannot separate the problems that we're having with the fishermen from the larger problem that we are having in our conflicting claims with China, and for that matter, for other countries in ASEAN. And that's why we have to look at it as maybe an opening. I always mention this, that we have to try every single way that we can. And I remind everyone that China and the United States came together because of ping pong. And who would have thought that that's where it would start? Who knows where our coming together will start?
But isn't that related, Mr. Marcos, to my earlier question about the Quad? You know, if you have a whole array of, militia there, wanting to take over the whole of the contested South China Sea, shouldn't you lean on the Quad as a collective security arrangement?
No, because that is a military solution, and that proposes a military solution. And I do not think we want a military solution because we simply do not want a war. I do not think China wants a war. I do not think the United States wants a war. The Philippines certainly does not want a war.
Well, but Mr. Gonzales just said that China only recognizes naked power. So what are we talking about?
I don't think that is the method for us to come to an agreement with the People's Republic of China. There are three ways to gain territory. One is upon agreement with arbitration by an international body, agreement of two or more parties. Number two is war. And number three is bilateral agreement. We're left only, I think, with bilateral agreement, and that's what we should pursue. I cannot see though what in this formulation, but how we are going to tell our fishermen, wag muna kayong mangisda dyan. Anong hanap buhay nila? Anong kakainin nila? Kailangan natin ayusin yung problemang yan in whatever way we can. Kaya kailangan isama natin, gawing bahagi ng malaking usapan sa China, yung unahin na natin, yung naging lagay ng ating mga mangingisda. Doon natin simulan. Hindi, malay natin, pag nasimulan natin dyan, ay lalawak ang usapan natin at kaganda.
But wouldn't a legal framework called the Regional Fishing Agreement be a solution to that? Because right now, what China is doing is unilaterally declaring a fishing holiday. You know, like, wow, bawal mangisda ngayon, ha? Sa susunod na buwan ka mangisda, ha? So, you know, she's setting all the rules for this contested South China Sea. So, if you were the chief architect of our foreign policy, wouldn't you want a regional fishing agreement where every country washed by the East China and the contested South China Sea are participants or members? And if I may add, and this is not to rain on the parade of Mr. Abella and Mr. Gonzales, I don't think we should lean on ASEAN. You know, the countries which are fed by the Mekong River, I'm sure they will cotton on to China. Because the Mekong rises from China. Big mo sabihin, wala kang tubig sa agriculture mo sa iyong tao, and we're talking about Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar. Diba? So, yeah, to repeat, I'm not raining on your parade, but I doubt very much that we should lead on ASEAN.
Well, I think that if a fishing agreement would be included in any code of conduct that we agree with China and ASEAN, that definitely should be part of it, because it is not a problem that we are suffering by ourselves. Other members of ASEAN have the same problem, and that is why it will be critical to have a robust and effective code of conduct between ASEAN and China must include the issue of fishing rights.
Yes, that's my point. Pull the leg of China into a regional fishing agreement.
Well, they already have entered into an agreement, into a code of conduct agreement years ago.
Yeah, but they're doing bilateral.
They are trying to do it bilaterally, and that's why I think it is more to China prefers to handle these issues bilaterally between their country and another country. But I think that the multilateral approach is still going to be important. We will pursue every avenue that we can.
Gentlemen, if you become the next President of the Republic, how do you plan to feed the 110 million Filipinos and the next generation if the prices of staple foods continue to increase? Specific po sana ang paglalatag po ng mga plano. Maraming salamat.
Ganun talaga, kailangan natin ayusin ang sektor natin ng agrikultura. At nakita kaagad ito nung pagdating ng pandemya na hindi tayo makapag-supply ng pagkain para sa ating mga kababayan dahil umaasa na lang tayo sa importation. Umaasa tayo sa importation dahil hindi na pinaganda ang agricultural sector. Kaya sang-ayon ako sa sinabi ni Calyodi na dapat ibisahan natin sa R&D. Kailangan yung mga, lalo na may climate change ngayon, yung mga bagong varieties ng palay, ng kahit ng lahat ng tanim ay pag-aralan natin para mas maganda magiging ani. Tapos lahat ng ayuda, lahat ng fertilizer, lahat ng pesticide, dapat makabili tayo ng mura. Tapos may pautang. Kaya siyempre kasama dyan yung patubig hanggang sa post-harvest facilities, hanggang sa processing. Dadagdagan ko lang hanggang sa pag-retail. Dahil kung ang gobyerno ang humahawak sa buong production sa buong linya ng produksyon hanggat sa pagbenta sa retail, ay ang gobyerno ay hindi dapat kumita. Kaya maipagbibili nila ng mas mura. Dito ay naranasan na natin ito. Nung nagkaroon tayong Masagana 99 dun sa production, meron tayong IRI at saka PhilRice dun sa R&D, meron tayong FTI dun sa NFA, na price stabilization, hanggang sa Kadiwa Store. Yun siguro ang modelo na pwede natin gayahin at ulitin.
I just want to ask about comparative advantage when we're talking about rice, because it's a basic economic precept that says you shouldn't make things that others can make cheaply. And many people have said that the Philippines lacks a comparative advantage in rice. So should we insist? I think this is related to the question of MJ with regard to food security policy. Should we insist on continuing planting a crop that we clearly don't have a comparative advantage?
Yes, I think we do. Simply because it is of strategic value to a state to have a good supply of food. So that again, like any crisis that comes, magkagera man, magkaalitan man tayo sa Thailand at saka sa Vietnam, sapat ang ating supply ng simulaan natin sa palay. Ngunit kailangan din yung lahat ng isda, lahat din ng nag-aalaga ng hayop. Kailangan yon lahat ay patulungan natin para kahit ano pang mangyari. Kagaya ng pandemya, nakita natin kaagad na paabot na nga tayo sa sitwasyon na mahirap paniwalaan na ang Pilipinas ay nag-i-import ng galunggong. At dapat naman siguro hindi tayo nasa ganung sitwasyon. Pagka nagka-problema ulit, mahirap na naman tayo. Kaya't kailangan natin tulungan. At kahit na sinasabi namin mas mura, bili-bili na tayo ng bili, may strategic na problema yan. Dahil pagka nagkagulo, wala tayong supply.
According to one of the documents the Philippines sent to the South China Sea Arbitration Tribunal, Vietnam occupies 20 features in the Spratlands. The Philippines occupies 10. China occupies 9. Malaysia occupies 4. China, Vietnam, and the Philippines are claiming all these features. This is in the Annex 97 of the Philippine Memorial Volume 4 of the South China Sea Arbitration Proceedings. If during your term as president, China leaves those features, how will you stop Vietnam from occupying the features that China would leave behind, given that there is no international decision granting the Philippines territorial sovereignty over those features?
Well, if China leaves those contested territories, how do we maintain and how do we prevent Vietnam now from taking their place? We will do the same things that we did with China. Once again, hopefully we will have by that time a code of conduct between ASEAN and China, and that code of conduct will be inclusive of all ASEAN members, and that is the agreement that we will not build any new features on any islands in the contested areas. Now, if we do not have that agreement, then we will have again to defend it in many ways by again having a presence there, and secondly we defend it by diplomatic means and by whatever way that we can, internationally and bilaterally and hopefully even multilaterally.
Magandang araw sa inyong lahat na tagapakinig. Ako po si Vilma Balandra Absalon, ina ni Kit Balandra Absalon, ng FAU football player na walang awang pinatay ng NPA. Kami po ay taga Masbate. Kung ikaw ay magiging pangulo ng ating bansa, ano ang direktiba o layunin mo upang matuldukan ang mga terorismong walang awang pumapatay ng mga taong walang kasalanan? At sana tuluyang mapuksa na wala nang ulit na mangyayari na pumatay pa sila ng inosenteng tao tulad ng ating anak. Ayoko na ang ating bayan ay maging magulo pa dahil sa kanila. Yun ang hinahanap ko po sa mga pangulo, na makipahayag nila ang kanilang layunin sa mga terorismo. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Ang unang responsibilidad ng kahit sino na elected official sa aming pagsusumpa is to defend and protect the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, and that includes the defense of our people and of our republic. Kaya't kung may lumalaban, gustong pabagsakin ng gobyerno, ay kailangan depensahan ng kanyang ng estado, ng gobyerno ang sarili niya at ang kapakanan ng taong bayan. At kaya tuloy-tuloy itong problema na ito, tuloy-tuloy dapat ang ating gawing peace talks hanggang nagkaroon na tayo ng talagang matunay na agreement ng kapayapaan. Kasama dyan ay yung balik-loob program na ginagawa. Patuloy natin yan, nakasabay yung NTFL Cup na nagiging very effective doon sa ating paglaban dito sa problema nito. Yung tanong ay ito nasagot na talagang may pag-aalsa dahil sa injustisya. Ang pinag-uusapan dito ay ang tinatawag na digmaan nga dito sa loob ng ating sariling bansa. Hindi tayo maaring sumang-ayon sa ideolohiya na kasama ang tinatawag nilang armed struggle. Dahil to change the government by violent means is rebellion. And hindi natin pwedeng pabayaan yan. Ay kailangan pagtanggol tayo ng Estado.
Senator Marcos, we're out of time.
Kahit anong paliwanag ang gagawin mo, hindi ako maaring sumang-ayon sa ideolohiya na may kasamang armed struggle para pabagsakin ang gobyerno. Kahit anuman ang dahilan, wala na talaga sa batas yan.
Gentlemen, ilang beses po nabanggit yung salitang peace talks. And it seems na sa dami ng taon na lumipas, wala po effect yung old-style na peace negotiations. But when the Duterte government diverted at nagtuon po sa pansin doon sa localized peace negotiations, malaki po ang naibunga through the NTFL CAC. Ano po bang malinaw sa inyo? Old-style peace talks o itong localized peace talks? At ipagpapatuloy po ba ninyo ito once kayo po ay mahalal bilang Pangulo ng Bansa?
Sa aking palagay, sa punot dulo, talagang kailangan natin ipagpatuloy ang peace talk. Dahil nandyan pa ang problema. Hindi pa natin naayos ng problema. Kailangan ipatuloy pa natin lahat ng ating maaring gawin para ayusin ang problema. Ngayon, kagaya ng nasabi mo, MJ, nagsimula yan na sa taas lamang ang nag-uusap. Ngunit napalitan nga ngayon ang sistema ng peace talks at dinadaan sa lokal sa pamamagitan ng mga iba't ibang programa, at ginagamit nga ang mga LGU officials na alam nila ang sitwasyon doon sa kanilang lugar, at bukod pa ron, kadalasan kilala nila yung mga lumalaban, yung mga tinatawag na rebelde. Kaya dito sa naging bagong pamamaraan, marami nang sumama sa balik-loob program, marami na ang natulungan ng NTFL CAC. Kaya effective ito, patuloy natin, palawakin pa natin. hindi lang siguro ang NTF-ELCAC ang magiging solusyon. Wala sigurong iisang solusyon. Kasama dyan ang distribution of wealth, kasama dyan ang pagbibigay ng pagkakataon para sumikat ang isang tao, na meron silang oportunidad na mag-aral, meron silang pagkakataon na magkaroon ng disenteng trabaho na maipakain ng kanilang pamilya. Hanggat umabot tayo doon ay siguro naman ang nasa atin pa lang, lalong-lalo na nasa krisis tayo, hindi natin may sasagawa yung kaagad. At umaahon pa lang tayo sa krisis natin, kailangan siguro natin ay pagpatuloy, talagang ipagpatuloy yung peace talks, ipagpatuloy yung balik loob program, pagpatuloy ang NTF-ELCAC. Ngunit huwag tayong aasa na yan lang ang magsosolusyon sa lahat ng problema natin. At marami pang malaking social problems na kailangan tugunan.
Recently, dineklara po ng pamahalaan na teroristang grupo ang CPP-NPA-NDF. Sa inyo pong apat, kaaway niyo po ba o hindi ang CPP-NPA-NDF? Kaibigan ba o kaaway?
Unang-una, ang definisyon ng terorista ay yung nagdadala ng violence sa mga hindi naman non-combatant kung tawagin, na mga sibilyan. Kaya't silang ginawang terorista. Ngayon, paano naman natin papayagan at sasabihin na tumutulong sa atin o kaibigan natin ang isang grupo na nambobomba, namamaril, at hindi lamang yung mga sundalo, hindi lamang yung mga pulis, kung hindi ang isang football player na walang kinalaman, nakaawa-awa, ay sa palagay ko wala na tayong ibang maaring sabihin kundi tratuhin sila ng kalaban dahil kinakalaban tayo. Kaya kailangan natin pagtanggol ang ating sarili.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, again, my question will be on defense and security. It's well known that Russia has indicated many times that it wants to train and exercise with our Philippine military. As a matter of fact, for the first time, it appointed a defense attaché at the Russian embassy here in Manila. This will, of course, require a status of forces agreement like what we have with the US and Australia. As our future chief executive, will you agree to a status of forces agreement with Russia?
Well, yes, we would have to look into what the status of forces agreement actually entails to our two countries between Russia and the Philippines, for the simple reason that it is an entirely novel concept for our two countries together. However, again, if we can see that there's an advantage to the Philippines for that. But you see, this is part of the effort that you, Professor, mentioned, that the superpowers are carving out against their spheres of influence. And in the same way that I spoke to you about the last question that concerned that, I do not think the spheres of influence model of the Cold War still applies. So we should be very wary of that. As a practical matter, if we are to train with all of those countries, then we could have a real logistical problem in our military, because the training is usually the beginnings of their hopefully supplying, or hopefully for the donor country, supplying us with military equipment. And so yes, it is good perhaps that we see what the different doctrine that I'm talking doctrine and military doctrines are. But I think we still have to decide at some point, and what they, as the engineers call it, we have to freeze the design of our military and say we have decided to go with these pieces of equipment and with this military doctrine. That's with those who we have
Senator
trained
Marcos, time's up.
Yeah, as an adjunct to your remarks, shouldn't we also abolish the AFP as it is configured presently? Because, you know, that was designed during the American occupation. Because we have new security interests, and therefore the doctrinal framework will also follow through. If you abolish the AFP, and as you have indicated, as four of you have indicated earlier, that it is really the sea which needs to be protected. And yet, you know, the bulk of your AFP consists of the army, which is running after insurgency, which is not its mandate, by the way. So shouldn't you be abolishing the AFP and putting a little bit more manpower and equipment on the Marines and the Navy, as you have articulated earlier?
That is a question for our military planners and thinkers as to how which branch of the military should be beefed up, should be strengthened.
But you will be the potential commander-in-chief of the Republic. So that decision will really be on your desk,
Yes,
not
it
on
will.
the AFP.
Yes, it will. And we will look at the situation at the time that these are being proposed. But again, we have to go back to the very practical matter of how our military operates. I cannot see how the Philippines will continue to exist if we do not have the AFP. And therefore, the idea of abolishing the AFP might be a logical conclusion, but it is not a practical one.
Yeah, on a personal note, I wrote a paper on abolishing the AFP, and I'm sure I got so many enemies. But yes, if you're interested to read that paper, I can share it with you.
Yes, please, ma'am. I would be very, very interested.
My question is this. My turn. Ayon po sa COMELEC, mayroon ngayong 67 million registered voters. Ayon naman sa RA 7166, ang mga kandidato sa pagkapangulo ay maaari lamang gumastos ng 10 piso kada botante, habang ang mga political parties naman ay may limit na 5 piso kada botante. Bago before mag-February 8 o ang opisyal na simula ng panahon ng pangkampanya, magkano na po ba ang iyong nagastos at sino ang nagbigay ng pinakamalaking porsyento ng iyong pondong pangkampanya?
Bago, unang-una ay hindi namin nililista ang mga donasyon at saka karamihan dyan in kind. Kagaya halimbawa, sasabihin ko sa inyo, mga karaban na ginagawa namin ay kami ay iniimbita lamang ng mga organizer dyan. At hindi kami ang kaya pinagsasabihan, sabi namin, huwag niyong pahabain, huwag niyong gagawin ito, o gawin na lang natin, magtanim tayo ng kahoy. Sinasabi na gusto pa rin namin magkaraban. Hindi naman namin maipigil dahil walang hinihingi sa amin. Kaya't wala kaming gastos doon. Yun sa pagsiguro, yung nakikita, siyempre, marami tayong pinupuntahan. Sa awa ng Diyos, marami pa naman tayong kaibigan na handang tumulong na magpahiram ng kanilang mga eroplano, ng kanilang mga helicopter, at gratis at amore naman ang aming usapan diyan. Kaya't hindi nga namin nililista dahil hindi naman kailangan pa na isama doon sa tinatawag na SOSE or Statement of yung gastos sa eleksyon. Yung magsisimula lang yan kung sa ano yung gastos noong February 8, mula noong February 8 hanggang sa pagdating ng halalan. Pagdating ng halalan ay lahat ng naging kandidato ay maglalabas ng SOSE at makikita ninyo kung sino ang donor, kung gaano kalaki ang binigay at yung listahan kung saan napunta yung pera niya.
Simula noong February 8 or 7 days ago, magkano na po ba ang inyong nagastos? Balak mo bang limitahan ang inyong gastos after February 8 sa nakatakda sa RA 7166? Dideklara mo ba sa Statement of Contributions and Expenditures or SOSE ang tamang amount? Bakit o bakit hindi?
Natural na kailangan yun sa SOSE, magbubuo kami ng SOSE. Ngunit nga sa ngayon ay hindi namin magagawa dahil nagsimula pa lang. At hindi pa maliwanag kung saan gagastusin kung anumang pera ang naibigay sa amin o nahawakan namin o sa partido at saka sa kandidato. Kaya sa ngayon ay wala pa yung impormasyon na yan kaya hindi pa maibibigay. Yang SOSE na yan ay mabubuo lamang pagdating na ng halalan at maliwanag na kung ano ang nangyari sa nakaraang 3 buwan, kung saan nanggaling ang aming ginagastos at kung saan napunta yung perang yan. Kung magkano ang binigay ng bawat contributor, yan ang mga requirement ng SOSE. Kaya ilalabas natin lahat.
Well, Senator Marcos, as we speak, can you give us an estimate? Pwede mo ba kaming bigyan ng estimate kung magkano na po ang ginasto nyo as of today, sa ngayong araw?
No, I cannot because I'm not following it. Hindi ko sinusundan dahil unang-una, wala kaming accounting ng before February 8 na tsaka since February 8. Kaya that data is just not available. Hindi namin binubuo yan. Ang aming binabantayan ngayon, ang gastusin mula nung February 8.
Karen, is it in order for me to ask my colleague here to elaborate on that question? Because I'm a stupid person, so I don't know the details of this RA that he talked about.
Okay. Well, I think...
Yeah, because when I investigated this and wrote the book on political parties and elections, Rolex, I noted that some people, because they don't want a money trail, a paper trail rather, will put the money in bayongs, you know, and just give it to you, Rolex. Ito yung ano. So, dyan ba sa RA na sinasabi mo, yung ganyang mga pagbibigay ng salapi, hindi matitrace, di ba?
Well, bilang po yan sa umpisa ng campaign period, which started last February 8. Yung before that, hindi bilang.
Yeah, but you know, only a stupid person will report na nakakuha ako ng milyon dyan sa bayon, di ba? That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think that's why there's a law. They're requiring...
Karen, hindi ko inaapi to kasi estudyante ko to eh.
Professor po eh. Kabukuhan na.
Idadagdag ko lang sa that the professor said na dapat parliamentary system dahil pag parliamentary system, multi-party system, ang partido ang talagang namumuno at talagang nagpapatakbo ng halalan para sa kanyang mga kandidato. Idadagdag ko na rin doon baka yung two-party system doon. Dahil pag two-party system tayo, partido talaga. Pag sinabi, nung dati LP, NP, may machinery sila. May talagang machinery. Sila ang gumagalaw at sila ang nagdadala sa kanilang mga kandidato. Kaya siguro, dapat nating tignan kung paano, kung nais natin iwasan itong sistema natin na 10 pesos per voter, 5 pesos sa partido, ay kung nais natin maiwasan yan, patibayin natin ang bahagi na ginagampanan ng ating mga partido sa mga halalan.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, you know. If any candidate does not have any political party behind him or her, whatever promises you make, that's just saliva. I don't know, because it's the political party which will make things happen. Diba?
Thank you. I'd like to turn your attention now to education, which I believe is relevant in preparing the country to compete in the future. Mostly, the initiatives in this sector included raising the salaries of teachers. But what is not mentioned in the policy work is that these increases favor only those in the public school system. In fact, the private education system has suffered unintended consequences involving mainly the migration of teachers from the private to the public sector. This is an added strain on the private schools, and it imperils the jobs of hundreds and thousands of teachers, administrators, and other employees. They have been reminding lawmakers and policymakers that the 1987 Constitution recognizes the complementary roles of public and private institutions in the educational system, according to Article 14, Section 4, Subsection 1. My question is, as President, how will you execute the constitutional provision on complementarity in education so that we have a stronger educational system built on a true-to-form public-private partnership?
Maganda at napunta ang usapan natin sa larangan ng edukasyon dahil sa aking pananaw ay ang edukasyon ang pinakamahalagang serbisyo na idinudulot ng pamahalaan sa kanyang mamamayan. Kaya't ang dapat unang gawin ay siyempre yung public school system ang unang dapat titignan. Patitibayin natin at saan natin pagagandahin, paano natin pagagandahin. Unang-una, suportahan natin ang ating mga guro na yung sapat ang kanilang hindi late yung kanilang sahod na dumadating. Unang-una, laging reklamo yan ng mga teacher natin. Pangalawa, lahat ng benepisyo na nasa batas ay maibigay natin sa kanila nang sa ganun, hindi nila kailangang isipin kung paano nila papakainin ang kanilang sariling pamilya at ang iniisip lamang nila kung paano sila magtuturo para pagandahin ang magiging kinabukasan ng ating mga kabataan. And sa bukod pa doon ay yung mga facilities. Kailangan yung silid-aralan ay paramihin natin, yung mga supplies na binibigay natin sa ating mga public school ay paramihin natin, pagandahin natin lahat ng mga materyales na ginagamit at sa ganung paraan ay ang mga teacher natin kailangan natin suportahan hindi lamang sa financial na suporta kung hindi sa pag-aaral, sa pag-refresher course para sila ay talagang tinuturo nila ang pinakabago at ang pinakatama na dapat turuan sa mga bata ngayon. Yes.
Senator Marcos?
Yes.
Senator Marcos.
Sa palagay ko, kahit anong voucher system ang gawin natin, magiging laging kulang yan. Kaya sinasabi ko, unahin natin ang ating public school system. Ngayon, paramihin natin ang ibinibigay ng pamahalaan na scholarship para yung mga deserving, yung mga napakasipag at napakatalino at napakatalented ay mabigyan ng pagkakataon na makapunta sa kahit anong eskwela. Hindi lamang dito sa Pilipinas, marami tayong scholarship programs na nanggagaling sa iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno. At sa ganung paraan din, maaari nating i-encourage, sabihin natin, kailangan natin ng agronomist. Di gumawa tayo ng scholar para maglabas tayo ng maraming scholarship fund para sa mga agronomist. Gusto natin na paramihin ang ating engineer. Ganun din. Kaya siguro, yan ang maaari nating magawa para bigyan ng pagkakataon ang nanggaling sa public school na makapag-aral sa mamahalin na private school.
Senator, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the study commissioned by COCOPEA. This is the Coordinating Council of Private Education Associations of the Philippines. They did a commission study around 2020 where the results were the returns on investment by private schools resulted in higher returns than the investments in the private educational system. So in a sense, there's private capital being invested for a public good. And yet, the private school system is saying that they are not given an even playing field because all of these initiatives, although well meant, somehow have these unintended consequences that work against the private educational sector's economic interest.
Well, the very nature of a public school as opposed to a private school is different. And as you say, the private capital is being expended to run that private school. And therefore, the decisions on how they run that school depends on the management of that school. Now, the public school is something we have control over. And that is why I think that we should focus our efforts first in the public school system. And the private schools will again find maybe if they need that, if that is what they need additional capital because it is not only an educational institution but it is also a business, and therefore they have to make those decisions themselves. Now, if we improve the quality of the teaching in our public schools and the support that we give our teachers, then I think we can even out that playing field that you're talking about.
Any reactions from our candidates?
Follow up.
Okay. Mr. Ang has a follow-up question.
Just the other day, one of our columnists, Father Rani Aquino, came out with a column warning against the measure in the Congress, House Bill 10282, which basically makes the Commission on Higher Education a very domineering institution in an environment where the private schools already feel that there's policy overreach and overregulation. They feel that this atmosphere stifles innovation in education, and because they are getting higher returns on their investments, it seems like it would be a wrong move to further empower these education institutions to continue these domineering policy work over the education system. Would you have a comment?
Well, I don't think that is not a systemic problem. That is a policy problem. And that is how we should address it. The system is not at fault here. It is the policy that's being undertaken that causes this dysfunction that Father Rani has been talking about.
Ang mga tanong ko po ay will concern two different sectors that needs government attention. First, meron po tayong 12 senior citizens sa buong Pilipinas based on latest data. Kung kayo po maging Pangulo, would you support the passage of a Universal Pension Act for seniors? Ano mga programa po ninyo sa mga senior citizens?
Well, siguro ang pinakauna, bago pa tayo magpapasa ng bagong batas na napakahilig natin gawin, hindi pa natin na-implementa yung batas ngayon sa pagbigay ng benepisyo para sa mga senior citizens, para sa mga retirees. At ngayon pa lang, dahan-dahang natutupad ang nasa batas na ang pagbigay ng ating mga pensyon para sa ating mga senior citizens. Mahalaga ito dahil alalahanin natin na ang mga senior citizens kadalasan ay hindi na nagtatrabaho at merong talaga dahil may edad na, may karamdaman din. Kaya siguro idagdag natin doon sa pension ay yung pagbayad na ng kanilang health insurance. Ang gobyerno na ang magbabayad ng kanilang health insurance para kapag may silang pangangailangan, may karamdaman sila, meron silang ipambayad. Ang isa pang hinaharap na problema ng ating mga senior citizens ay yung age discrimination na sinasabi dahil kahit nais pa nilang bumalik sa trabaho ay hindi na sila tinatanggap dahil sasabihin, ba't pa natin kukunin yan, hindi natatagal yan, mahina ng katawan yan, hindi na kaya yung trabaho. Kaya dapat yung ganyang klaseng pagpipili ng bata lamang para makapasok sa trabaho, kung kaya namang gawin ng isang nakakatanda, ay bakit we should not discriminate against them and allow them to continue to work.
Pabor po ba kayo sa pagsasabatas ng Department of Indigenous Peoples Affairs? Magkaroon po ng boses sa inyong gabinete para po sa mga IP. 18 million population po sila, over 48% of total land air in the Philippines. And what will be your legacy sa mga kapatid nating IPs? Thank you, sir.
Siguro ang pinakauna nating gawin para mabigyan naman ng hustisya ang ating mga unang Pilipino, ang ating mga IPs, ay kailangan maging maliwanag kung ano ba saan ang kanilang tinatawag na ancestral domain. Kung ano yung lupa nila mula nung unang panahon ay kanila na yan. Kailangan kilalanin ng pamahalaan, kailangan kilalanin ng batas yan. Ngayon, pag may papasok na halimbawa nagiging problema ito sa mga minahan at sinasabi basta pinapaalis na lang yung IP at kung ang pinakamalaking maibibigay sa kanila ay magtrabaho doon sa mina, dapat palitan natin yung sistema niyan at kilalanin nga natin silang may-ari ng lupa na yan. At pagka nagawa natin yan at naging maliwanag kung ano ang ancestral domain ng bawat tribo, ng bawat IP, ay ang gagawin natin, ang trato natin sa kanila, parang pangkaraniwan na mamamayang Pilipino. Kung lupa nila, dapat kung sino man ang papasok na malaking negosyante, hindi naman sila pwedeng paalisin doon. Meron silang gagawa sila ng joint venture doon sa may-ari ng lupa. At kung ano man ang kinikita doon sa lupa ng ancestral domain ng mga IP, dapat mapunta sa mga IP.
Why should the Filipino people trust you with their future in the next 6 years? Each candidate has 2 minutes.
Bago lahat, magpapasalamat ako sa SMNI sa pagkakataong ito na ibinigay ninyo sa amin upang pag-usapan ang mga mauugong na issue na iniisip ng ating mga kababayan. Marami po tayong issue na natinalakay ngayong hapon, hanggang gabi na ito. At nakikita naman natin sa mga sagot ng lahat ng kandidato na humarap sa inyo na hindi magiging madali ang pag-ahon, ang pagbangon mula sa krisis ng pandemya, mula sa krisis ng ekonomiya na dala rin ng pandemya. Kaya naman po, ako ay tapat ang aking paniniwala na ang unang hakbang na para tayo ay makaharap at kahit anong hamon ay ang pagkakaisa. Kaya't ang adhikain ko, pinagsisigaw sa ating kampanya ay ang unang hakbang na kailangang gawin natin sa larangan, hindi lamang sa larangan ng politika, kung hindi sa ating lipunan. Yun ang pagkakaisa. Dahil hindi na, kahit sino naman sa atin ay hindi kayang ayusin lahat itong problemang ito. Lahat tayo ay nangangailangan ng tulong, lahat tayo ay kailangan natin ang tulong ng bawat Pilipino para tayo makaharap at masabi natin, hindi lang tayo bumalik sa nakaraan na bago ng pandemya, tayo ay sumikat pa at nalampasan na natin yung pandemya at nalampasan na natin yung sitwasyon natin bago ng pandemya at masikat na ang Pilipinas. Yan lamang, hindi po mangyayari yan kung hindi magkapit-bisig ang bawat sektor, ang bawat mamamayang Pilipino. Kaya ang adhikain ko, ang adhikain ng unity team na aking dala ay ang pagkakaisa. Ito ay naging kilusan na at wag nating itigil hanggang tayo magtagumpay at masasabi natin na ipinagkaisa natin ang sambayan ng Pilipino. Upang dumating dito at kung ano pa ang ating ipinagpatuloy para sa pagkakaisa. At mararamdaman po natin kung tayo ay tuluyang magmahal sa isa't isa, kung tayo ay tuluyang magmahal sa Pilipinas, sama-sama po tayong babangon muli.